What comes to your mind when you hear the word architecture? Is it a city? A building? Its rich history of styles? Or is it a career? But how do we know which one's architecture and which one's a building? We encounter buildings essentially most of our lives, and yet we never really questioned the idea of what a building is. But what makes architecture architecture? What makes the word architecture stand out that a building isn't? To take it a step further, what is the difference between architecture and buildings? A simple way to describe a building is a structure that captures space to serve the functional purpose, depending on what it's going to be used for. First and foremost, buildings prioritize safety, from emergency exits to application to building codes. Each building provides a vast amount of different services, mostly being spaces that we use for our needs, like having our own private spaces in apartments or houses, or going to store for groceries, having a facility for educational purpose, or an office space to make a living. Most importantly, going to a Kirby Cap, or other facilities that we use our time in. There's many different buildings that can range from scale, proportion, form, or shape. And how the space will be utilized is the definition to the building's purpose. Think of a hospital, for example, a place of treatment, medical research, and caretaking. That form of space is needed rather much larger for its building. It would be necessary to provide a larger space, a larger form for that building. The most important aspects to putting all this design together is its various systems. Different systems go into the thought, such as building systems like mechanical, electrical, plumbing, or structural system to understanding the details and calculations and the physics of the building. Understanding the environmental side as well, with the contextual impact it can occur when it's being constructed. All organized into one body, breathing life into its building system. Importantly, this allows us to exist easier and provide whatever is necessary in our needs within the spaces. So, to sum it up, buildings exist to construct the purpose of functional services, but we rarely think about how much it impacts our life. Without it, it'd be a lot harder to live. So the next part is, when we think about architecture, they're usually either historical or there's something unique about that element, whether it be the interior space, the exterior, whether it be the form of the building, the landscape, the urban cities, or the architects themselves. But the basic core of architecture is spatial design of practical needs, a sense of expression, the contextual impact, and constructing buildings and making them into reality. Architecture is first and foremost a practice, providing services to design buildings. In a practical sense, finding ways to solve problems through spatial design, questioning the bigger picture, and understanding what kind of impact it's going to become, and have a positive impact to the built environment, aligning with the goals and ideas to make it happen. Take what you learned from buildings and add human value traits into the scope of the entirety of its existence. Going from the hospital example, a building's function provides flow and a larger facility in order to incorporate those rooms for treatment, medical care, caretaking. But architecture has a little bit more than that. The architectural elements has a sense of human values and human emotion. Those emotional aspects are imprinted in your memory. It provides context within that memory of what that space looks like. From depth, texture, it provides context within the imagination of how you experience that space, which all correlates into human experience. Different perceptions to how you experience what a hospital is, the general identity of hospitals, and then there's the different perception to what their experience is like. It provides within the services and scope of work of what it needed to be fulfilled. Architecture amplifies that with the quality of life through human experiences. Architecture has human emotions or a feeling of space within that context. Architecture captures those spaces within that time frame, within memory, within mind. Buildings capture the functional essence within that time, while architecture captures the sense of expression within that time frame. One cannot exist without the other. And while buildings add context to the place, architecture creates conditions, setting itself to question those moments. The experiences that heighten the senses, imprinting that perception into the spatial cognition, which activates those memories by emotional reactions. That is the basic core to how architecture is performed. But to the definition of architecture, it's a little bit tricky. The meaning of architecture changes over time as cultures, communities, and technology grows within different eras and generations. A lot of their own interpretation principles, manifesto, can be varied, and depending on what time frame they are, they have their own definition, and how they define it is within either their perspective, experience, their work, or many other aspects that they involve in their life. But what's important to all of those core and aspects is that architecture has the art of expression and the construction of buildings, all formulated into one. But with all the definition, it comes to one thing. It's experiential. It truly asks the questions of what, who, how, and why this space is made, establishing the curiosity and thoughts by the user's interaction. The lifespan of buildings and architecture determines on empathy, the criteria to keep living, neither citing the good or the bad, but simply the means of expression. It's very poetic, or almost philosophical in a way. And to sum it all up, it's expressive. It almost makes you feel alive in a sense, like you're living. So that's kind of the basic core of what we can understand what building and architecture is. But what's the difference? It seems like buildings and architecture seems like the exact same thing, whether it just be functional or with the human emotion aspect of how we live our life. So let's get into. There's many interpretations, different answers, different questions, but here's my take on what the difference between the two are. Buildings transform into architecture. Let's talk about it. Why transformation? Architecture has all of the variables to a building, but what buildings lack to become architecture is the user's question to the spatial expression. Buildings have a purpose to serve the necessary spatial function for the users. Architecture provides meaning in its purpose. Both presents the opportunity, but to what value? That value is the question to their quality of life. So the big question in the difference between the two and its transformation altogether, when does it become architecture? And the answer to that is the friends we made along the way. The answers are the users, us. When we use the buildings, when we use the facility, the core memory we have in our mind when we use those spaces is what makes architecture architecture. It isn't immediate or activated like a switch. It's a process developed, turning what you've experienced into thoughts and emotions, a story to how you perceive the place. Buildings are most likely things you don't really think about, but rather the surfaces itself. It gets the job completed to do what we need to do. Nothing outside, but prioritize to its tasks. Without questioning the encounter, the space that brings life to the place, it's unconscious. Architecture, in a sense, questions the built environment within the context, amplifying the experiential moments into memory, leaving a strong impression to the users. In summary, buildings exist, but architecture lives. All of this goes to the simple criteria, quality and value of the space. The user brings the space to life, making the building alive and transforming that into the living, architecture. So buildings transform into architecture, and that's the main difference between the two. But why is this important? Why is it important for us to understand the difference between the two? And further into question, what does this mean for us? Let's take it a step further. Who do we define ourselves as? A building or architecture? Let me explain. Buildings are essentially functional and its purpose is to serve. While architecture has all of those elements, but amplified with human cores and values. So it wouldn't be a bit too strange that buildings transform into architecture. But to put these two in perspective, whether it's the abstract form or the simplicity of construction, without the gathering of users or the users providing meaning to those structures, this determines the color of life, bring about the purpose, meanings, and value of those spaces and the continuation of its life. Without the users, there's no meaning in buildings. There's no meaning of providing service when there's nobody going to be around you to provide. It's a sense where we're kind of like buildings. When buildings transform into architecture, architecture can also transform back into a building. And that's the biggest difference between those two. Architecture has memories of the past, while dreams of the future. How to transform into that is the users have to bring the building to life. The character of an individual drives the quality of architecture, transforming that building into their own architecture.
But how do we become buildings and how do we become architecture? I have no clue, but it is because the answer solely lies with you. The most important identity is understanding who you are as a person. Have you ever felt in the moment where in a place in time you look around your surroundings and you feel and you sense the natural surrounding environment? What are your conditions like? What does it feel? What do you hear? What do you see? What do you remember? And what are your thoughts? Those simplest forms of questions are most important to understand what sort of place you imagine you'd like to be in.
Because when you love something, you must have experienced it.
All of this accumulates to what your preference is in architecture or what your needs are in a building.
And from the perspective of others, it goes without saying, we're just there. Without care or maintenance of the building, they merely exist, and the best that we can do is really become the best version of ourselves. The places we cherish in our memories, the remembrance of the past, the dreams we inspire to see, the imagination of our future, the users, like the people who support around us, encourage us to live, to become our own architecture.
Hey, thanks for sticking at the end, and thanks for watching the video. I'll also be on interacting in social media, so check out the descriptions at the bottom to follow more and subscribe for more. Subscribe, notification on for more videos. Thanks, see ya, bye!